this idea that the recycling industry, that we set up a recycling industry that revolves around a mixed yellow lid bin that's kind of a choose your own adventure, that's set up separately across 79 different councils with different things they accept and different lids. The idea that that's not going to confuse the community and cause it angst and ultimately lead to this sort of mixed stream of products that a MRF somehow needs to magically disaggregate. It's not the ideal way to develop a recycling sector, and I think if we had our time again, we'd probably think twice about going so far down the commingled recycling route. So I think all of those things you've been talking about in terms of container deposit schemes and the role they play in getting better separated commodities, and equally the role of engaging with our households on a deep, regular and simple way, so that if you are a householder in Nillumbik or a householder in Yarra Ranges or a householder in Port Phillip or wherever you are, you're really clear on what the expectation is of you, what goes in what bin, how that needs to be presented at the curbside, and that ultimately will lead to MRFs that are more able to cope with those streams and higher commodity prices and higher opportunity for that at the end of the line.
Hey everyone, welcome to the next episode of Think Beginning Not End podcast, and today our special guest is Matt Genever, Director of Resource Recovery at Sustainability Victoria. And for those of you that don't know, Sustainability Victoria is a government-funded organisation that sits under the environmental policy here in Victoria in Australia. Now Matt's got over 15 years experience in the resource recovery sector, and it's great to have you on board. Matt's also the former CEO of Tyre Stewardship Australia, among many other career highlights, including running his own business. And more than anything, Matt loves to see action on the ground, making meaningful change. And having seen Matt speak numerous times, I thought, what a better guest that we could not have on than Matt Genever from Sustainability Victoria. Thanks for coming on, Matt. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Simon. I really appreciate it. Look, as you know, I'm a huge advocate for this sector. It's a great sector, some amazing, remarkable, innovative businesses, and always proud to be part of it. And certainly Sustainability Victoria, as you said, we're part of the environment portfolio here in Victoria. We've got a board, we report into the Minister for Environment and Climate Change, and really we're about taking policy ideas from the Victorian government and turning it into action. And that's either in resource recovery or climate change or energy. And it's really about taking those ideas and putting them on the ground with things like infrastructure funding and partnerships with the community and partnerships with business and all that sort of activity. So, combines two of my passions for getting things done and this great sector that we work in.
And Matt, just for our wider audience, tell us a little bit about your journey to get to being the Resource Recovery Director, because you have worked both the public sector and the private sector, running your own business as well. Just for our wider audience, tell us a little bit about Matt Genever and what your journey's been and how you've got to where you are now.
Yeah, look, I mean, I spent a lot of my early years working in consulting, mostly around things like hazardous waste, asbestos, contaminated land, and then sort of started doing some strategic waste and recycling work probably 10, 12 years ago, and then had my first stint in the state government working for SV the first time round and managed a lot of their waste infrastructure funding programs. And then stepped back out of the state government again, did some more consulting, as you said, ran Tyre Stewardship Australia for a couple of years, which was a really great experience, challenging space, as you know, end-of-life tyres. Then ran my own business for a couple of years. And I think, this kind of, the difference between the public and the private sector, I think is somewhat misunderstood. I think there's this perception that the public sector is kind of an easier gig, and I would disagree with that. It's long hours and it's often a lot of work to get something done. You know, if you're in the private sector, you make a decision, you have a look at it and make sure it stacks up commercially, and bang, off you go, and you chase that profit. In the public sector, there's a lot of different layers. There's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of, obviously politics comes into it. So it's harder to get things done. But I think equally, when you get those things done, they're really meaningful. It's about purpose, and working for the public sector is all about purpose. And indeed, in terms of my journey, that's what kind of coaxed me back from the private sector, was really getting into a for-purpose organisation that's trying to make things better for a whole heap of people. And SV is certainly a vehicle for doing that.
Yep. Which leads me on to the next question, Matt, which is, what does it feel like to lead an organisation at probably, there's never been a more, critical, challenging or exciting time. What does it feel like to lead an organisation through this period of time for the resource recovery sector?
Yeah, look, obviously, so firstly, we've got a great executive team that I'm part of, and obviously the resource recovery sector is my sector. But we've also got some amazing leaders around climate change, around community engagement, around behaviour change. So it's wonderful to be part of a team that's really trying to push this environmental sustainability journey forward in practical, meaningful, on-the-ground type partnerships and programs. For me, yeah, look, it's been a really challenging 2 years. There's no doubt. I think if somebody had have told me stepping back into the state government right at the time that we were going to see such a huge structural change in the resource recovery sector, it has been, I think, ultimately challenging for everyone on both sides of the fence.
What's been the most challenging for you? What have you found most challenging?
Yeah, I think personally, it's you make that point before about this sort of difference between private and public sector, and for me, I think the most difficult, but also the best opportunity and the best value, I suppose, I've been able to add over the last 2 years, I think, is to bring some of those industry insights, my great connections across this awesome sector that we have. It's been difficult for me to bring those messages in, I think, and try and permeate them through what is quite a complex government landscape. But equally, I think it's also been where I've added the most value, and it's something I'm proud to have been able to bring back into SV. And I'm certainly not an island. I've got a team of 45 fantastic, passionate, driven, knowledgeable individuals, and I think that's the thing that gets me out of bed every morning.
Yeah, like as an observation, one of the things that I think has happened really well is there hasn't been any knee-jerk reactions. You guys have obviously had a strategy and you've stuck to it, and I've been lucky enough to sit in some of those workshop groups. And to me, it's like you've had a strategy, you're sticking to it, you're collecting information, and then you're going to put it all together with what may be the best outcome for the state.
Yeah, look, I'm glad it looks like that externally, and certainly we do. I think what the Victorian government did well, and I know other states and territories did too, is we released a document pretty early on, which was the Recycling Industry Strategic Plan, which actually does really set a foundation for the activity that's going on now and the new policy that's will be released in Victoria soon. But I think even for us, even with a good strategic vision and strategic document, there is no doubt that through particularly the height of the crisis, which for your international listeners, Simon, as you know, was essentially the cessation of recycling services for about 30% of the state, and a whole heap of recycling going straight to landfill when SKM Recycling went into administration. So that actually was, even in the face of the strategy, that we had a very, very challenging time. We needed to support councils who were trying to do the best for their residents. We needed to give good strategic advice to government on the steps and decisions that it could take. And ultimately, it's a really tricky situation. Essentially, the state government gets is right in the firing line. If you're Joe Public, you kind of look to the government and say, "Hey, what's going on here?" But ultimately, we didn't own any of those contracts. We don't own any of the commercial arrangements with SKM, and it was a private business making decisions that suited itself. So, to some extent, it was a challenging thing where we didn't really have the levers and the powers, yet was still really the community was looking to us for action. So. I'm glad externally it's looked like clear sailing, but it's certainly been a really challenging. Sort of that 3 months in particular was very challenging for everyone, but really glad we're out the other side of it now. And I think the future for Victorian recycling, whilst still, it's going to be hard yards, I think it's really looking promising.
Yeah. Just divulging a bit on Sustainability Victoria, just for our international audience, I just want to explain to our audience how diverse your organisation is, and doing some research for today. I think it was in 2019, SV helped households, schools and businesses save something like $1 million in energy costs. I mean, that's extraordinary.
It is. I mean, it's you're absolutely right. It's important to note that obviously resource recovery is part of what we do, but it's not all of what we do. And there's some fantastic programs out there. Things like the Resource Smart Schools program that we've been running for many years has had a huge impact on the way schools deal with energy, waste, water, and their sort of environmental sustainability credentials. One of the things I'm really proud about that SV's done in the last couple of years is programs that support low-income households around energy use. So we've got two programs, one called Healthy Homes and the other called Latrobe Valley Home Upgrades Program. And that's really about there's this really crappy inverse relationship between how wealthy you are or how wealthy you're not, and the thermal efficiency of your house. So ultimately, it turns out that people who are the most vulnerable are living in the houses that are least able to adapt to either colder weather or hotter weather. So we've been able to go into those houses and fund upgrades, things like insulation, new heating, those types of things that will improve thermal comfort for low-income house owners, and it's just had a huge impact. Some of the feedback's been great. We get stories from people saying, "Oh, we can have guests over now. We never used to be able to. I can sleep at night without coughing because I'm, in the middle of winter. It's not cold." So those sorts of things are, really what gets us excited, and those sort of savings and energy outcomes and livability outcomes for people is great to see.
Yeah, improving people's living standards that may not have been able to do it otherwise. Right?
Absolutely. And yeah, we work with local governments around things like climate change programs and strategies. We've worked in renewable energy a lot. We've worked in the built environment space, working with volume home builders to make sure that new housing stock is really high standard in terms of energy efficiency. So yeah, a range of great activities.
Matt, just coming back on to you personally, there's a great article that you wrote that most people may have read on LinkedIn, and really the essence of it was saying, look, banning straws is great, but it's just simply not enough. And you made reference that Australia should maybe look more towards what potentially RAP and the UK are doing, and take a more holistic, mature approach, and then see where we are in the next 12 to 24 months. And just some of those points were, moving away from the idea that plastic is evil, which I totally agree with. Measure, measure, measure. Again, that's something that we talk about a lot when we're training and educating people. Linking the packaging sector to the recycling sector, that's a massive gap. Obviously, everyone's trying to fill at the moment. Taking the whole supply chain approach, and then I know we spoke a little bit about this point off camera, which was sustainable procurement, or procurement in particular. Matt, how close do you think we are? We're 12 months on. Are we shifting the needle enough? Where do you think, from writing that article to where we are now, what's your view?
Yeah, look, I think we are. I think we really are getting to the point where those sort of interventions are starting to come through in a meaningful way and starting to have an impact. And it's interesting, I post a lot on LinkedIn like you do. I think it's a good vehicle for engaging with people in this space. And I don't think I've ever had an article that elicited as much debate as that one did. And, I think sometimes you've got to throw something a little bit controversial out there to get people talking. And, I think the idea of banning straws or banning anything that has a detrimental impact to the environment is actually a good thing. And I think something like that's great at getting households engaged and people thinking about it. But you're right, the point I was making there is it's the tip of a very, very large iceberg. I think what we're starting to see now, not just in Victoria, but across Australia, and it was great to hear Gail on your podcast recently, who's really been a champion for this nationally, is all of those pieces starting to move forward. We're seeing better and more investment in infrastructure. We've got the work that we're doing with many companies on market development and product development, which is so important. We just cannot tell companies or people to recycle if there's no beneficial product or end use that's going to come out of that, because then you just end up with stockpiles and a whole stack of other issues. So we're seeing great R&D, great commercialisation investment, things like the integrated recycling plastic sleeper that we were talking about before, companies like RPM Pipes and some of the great work they're doing. So that end of the chain is starting to come through. And finally, government procurement, again, whilst it's the tip of the iceberg, is starting to make headway as well.
What do you think could speed that part up, Matt? Because I get this asked a lot from people out on the street.
Oh, look, it's all about risk, isn't it, if we're being honest here. The primary vehicle for government procurement at the moment that people are looking to, understandably, is infrastructure, so roads and rail. So in Victoria and other states, it's big spend, a lot of material use, and the opportunity for recycled content is huge. And I think if you look at it through two lenses, you see just how difficult that transition can be. So one of the things that Victoria is leading Australia and probably the world in is recycling glass, so low value glass, not the glass that you can recycle back into new bottles, but glass fines back into recycled glass sand, and using that as a virgin sand replacement in our road construction. Now, companies like Alex Fraser in the last 3 years have dramatically increased their supply of that, and that's because the procurement levers have been there. Government suppliers, government contractors have asked specifically to buy that product, and as a result, Alex Fraser's been able to ramp up demand and are doing huge tons of that material, which is great. But it's taken 10 years to get there, and people don't realise we've been working with those guys for over a decade to make sure the specifications are there, the standards are there, the product testing is being done, that everybody in the supply chain is really comfortable on how it looks and how it performs and how it acts. In terms of how we accelerate sort of the other things like plastic sleepers is a really good example, we've got to get that sort of level of strong evidence, strong support within government, within purchasers, so that they feel very comfortable that the products are going to perform, they've got the quality right, they've got the quantity right, they can order them and get them the same way they'd get a virgin alternative. And that's where the sort of the risk aversion can sometimes come in. And ultimately, we end up in a state of chicken and egg. And I see that every day. I see recycling companies that say, you know what, I will invest. I want to ramp up production of this, but I just need a buy order. If someone wants to order 60,000 of these widgets, we know they perform well. We know that there's a standard there. If someone orders 60,000, I'll invest $5 million to get my production up. But without that, it's all risk for me. And equally on the other side, you've got someone on the government procurement side of things that says, well, I don't want to order 60,000 until I know you can supply 60,000. And at the moment, I know your factory can't do that. So it's kind of like this weird Mexican standoff. And I think in terms of accelerating things, it's both sides of that. Government certainly needs to take more of a risk and support companies and saying, you know what, we are going to help you along this journey. We are going to put orders in advance. We are going to support you in your infrastructure investment, and equally then I think the industry coming in behind that to follow through. So I think once we start getting that sort of the risk sharing a little bit fairer, then I think we'll see the acceleration come.
And what do you think, Matt, the plastic industry in particular, or plastic manufacturers could do to communicate that message with either the government or even with other organisations about their products?
Yeah, look, I think one of the things we learnt pretty quickly on this journey is that government procurers, they don't always have access to all of the information that they might need to be making decision. It's something we're really cognizant of, and you've got some businesses in our great sector that fly under the radar. They do really good work, but they don't necessarily bang the drum. And if you're a small to medium-sized recycler and you're coming up against a huge construction company that's using virgin concrete or something, they've got a marketing department, everybody knows them, they're out and about. So visibility, I think, is really important. One of the things we've committed to doing at Sustainability Victoria is releasing a recycled products directory that will basically be used by government procurers so they can actually see what products are out there, how they perform, how much they cost, what specifications they meet, and that will hopefully elevate some of those businesses that fly under the radar. And equally, I think everyone in this space should be doing work to tell the good stories. You and I are in the same view of this, is that as soon as there's negative stories, everybody wants to jump on them, particularly mainstream media. But there's so many great stories out there about businesses that have ridden through the last sort of 24 months of heartache and are out there doing great things. And I think it's up to me and you and everybody else to be telling those stories and proliferating that information. So I think anyone out there that's got a social media footprint or any sort of media footprint, find the good stories in this sector and just get them out there.
Yeah, I think the industry directory is an interesting one, and I don't know if they're doing it in other countries, but I would encourage any other country to be putting these same kind of documents together if we're really going to encourage people to buy it. It's promoting what's available and all the rest of it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's important to us, I mean, we're sustainability people, yeah. I know a lot about the resource recovery sector, but I've never built a road or I've never built a rail line before. I'm not an engineer, so it's really important for us when we're doing things like the directory to make sure that those cross-government links are being made, and we try and work really closely with Department of Transport and Jobs Precincts and Innovation and those sorts of parts of government, because if you're a government procurer, you've already got information that you go and source every day. So instead of trying to do something that sort of sits separately to that, how can we link in to make sure that that information we've got is getting into those same channels so that they can access it more easily and make nimble decisions like we know they like to.
Yeah. And Matt, just like some context around, you guys have funded a fair few projects. Are there some of them that we can discuss? Is there an overview you can give to everyone about what are the projects potentially on the go now, and what are the ones that have been interesting? Yeah, I mean, they're all interesting. Yeah. And I mean that genuinely. They are. I think if you're in this sector, it doesn't matter whether it's somebody just upgrading a shredder or someone putting a whole new bit of kit in. It's they're all great projects. I mean, we've got about 170 infrastructure projects on the go at the moment. We've done a lot in the e-waste space in the last few years to support the government, in rolling out a compliant network of e-waste collection points. I suppose our main infrastructure funding has been through the Resource Recovery Infrastructure Fund, which is about $25 million that we've leveraged into about $110 million of private sector investment. So that sort of widened the pool considerably. And there's about 50 or 60 projects there, some of which are at completion and others that are still in development. I think we spoke about a few earlier. The Advanced Circular Polymers plastic facility out in Somerton is a really fantastic facility. We've struggled with that ability domestically to take mixed plastic out of a MRF, separate it into its component parts and then palletize it or hot wash flake it into a product that's then marketable. And I think in terms of where we can add the most value with our infrastructure funding, it really is in that sort of sweet spot. We want a recycling industry that can plug directly into the manufacturing industry. Yep. That is so important. If you're a manufacturer, recycling isn't your business, making widgets is. Yeah. And if you can't get that feedstock in a condition that suits what you need and the quality you need it at the quantity you need it, then it's impossible for us to knock on your door and say you should be buying recycled. So that gap there, making sure the recycling industry can plug straight into manufacturing, is where we really try and target as much of our investment as we can, and Advanced Circular Polymers is a good example. There, I think, some really critical new infrastructure, the Repurpose It facility out in Epping. It's a great site out there, huge footprint,
great buffers, and again taking sort of mixed C&D waste or demolition waste from some of the large urban development that's going on in the north and northwest of our state, separating that out into really high quality commodities and flipping that straight back into infrastructure projects is a great example.
And what are some of the applications? So obviously going into roads, going into concrete.
Yeah, so that facility essentially sorts out to multiple grades of aggregates, and then also all the fines go back into a topsoil mix that they can apply straight back out into the same developments that essentially they're preparing for housing. So it's a good sort of closed loop system. I've been really impressed with the bingo facility out in West Melbourne, which we didn't fund, but we've got a good relationship with Bingo and have been working with them on a number of projects. Again, I love that sort of closed loop scenario where you've got 1,000 tonne of material coming in a day at the front end, great high quality sorting infrastructure, and really clean graded product coming out the back that essentially those same B doubles can pick straight up and flip around the backside and go straight back out and onto site. So that's important because, as you know, margins live with logistics. So if you're on a high volume project, you can send material in one way and pull product out the other in the same transaction. That's a win-win for everybody. So yeah, I've been really impressed with what Bingo have been doing. So yeah, that's a couple of examples off the top of my head.
And is there where are you seeing some of the investment inquiry coming from for the future, do you think, Matt? And what I mean by that is our infrastructure starting to line up with these gaps that we know that exist?
Yeah, look, it's getting there. There is still a critical gap in the fibre market here in Victoria, and I think across Australia and globally. The introduction, obviously, the waste, again, for your international followers, Simon, the Australian government and all of the states and territories have essentially agreed to ban the export of waste commodities or unprocessed waste commodities from Australia, including mixed low-grade paper. What that means is essentially, we need a domestic industry that can cope with all of that volume, and quite simply, we don't have that at the moment. So I think that's where the next tranche of investment needs to happen.
What do you think on the banning of the waste export? Obviously that needs to happen at some point to stimulate locally. My view has been we're not ready for it just yet. We probably need to just regulate what is being sent. Yeah.
Look, I need to be somewhat careful given my minister has signed up to those bans. But look, I think essentially we need an industry that is competitive, that can provide, that can generate value-added products and sell those into a market. And if that means we need to change the structure of our sector to say, you know what, you used to be able to export pretty much anything. We want to tighten that and say you need to be proving to us that you're creating a product, a viable, marketable product that meets some sort of specification, and then you can compete on the open market. So I'm actually okay with that. I think we do need to be careful that we're not cutting off our nose to spite our face, and in a very, very globally competitive marketplace, we want to make sure that the infrastructure investment is there and that in fact we have the capability to in fact do that value adding before those bans come in. So I think the timelines are very ambitious, and certainly I know that a lot of our investment in the next sort of 12 to 24 months will be very much targeted at trying to make the Victorian industry ready to adapt to those bans.
Yep. And Matt, like the 2025 packaging targets that are being set, again, another question about infrastructure, but some of those targets, I know some brands are already there. They're at 30% or whatever they've committed to. But do you think that those targets are achievable given where we sit with the amount of infrastructure we've got right now?
I do, and I think the packaging targets actually, if you look at where they sit as part of the National Waste Policy Action Plan, which has a host of targets, of which packaging targets are just a part of it, I actually think they sit quite complementary to the broader sort of resource recovery targets. And the reason I say that is because traditionally, like many other jurisdictions, we've had targets that have pretty much just been a resource recovery rate. Yeah, we want to target 70% or 75% resource recovery, or we want to target 50% municipal resource recovery. What we haven't necessarily done is close that out with targets that are at the supply end of that, to say, well, you know what, it's great to have a target that's resource recovery focused, but unless we've got a market pull, a demand for that recycle it, then it's going to be hard to meet that. So I think the fact that the targets go a little bit further and say, well, it's not just about resource recovery, it's about using that content back into new packaging. I actually think it's a really good thing. Whether or not we're quite ready to get there, obviously time will tell. I think they're ambitious, the timelines are ambitious, but again, I think a bit of ambition in this sector is fantastic, and it's great to see the federal government finally putting money where its mouth is, and the federal government has largely been completely silent on the waste and resource recovery sector for the better part of 10 years. So it's great to see $100 million being put into the CEFC Recycling Fund, and also a $20 million commitment around product stewardship, which is obviously directly linked to packaging. And what I also think the packaging targets do is they open the supply chain up a bit more.
Absolutely.
If you've got a target that's just resource recovery based, and we've seen it before, the construction and demolition sector can play such a significant role in that, because it's so heavily weight focused, that it doesn't necessarily lead to those kind of value, higher value outcomes for some of our commodities like plastics. So I think the targets around buying recycled and using recycled content mean that we have an opportunity to invest in domestic capacity to take clean washed PET, clean washed HDPE, those high value $500 a tonne plus commodities, and instead of ship them offshore, turn them back into packaging right here and use that as part of the FMCG market as a direct input. So I kind of think, that higher value, those higher value commodities, if we can be doing genuine recycling, so product to product recycling rather than downcycling, that's just a great opportunity for new jobs, new skills, new technology, new investment, and that's ultimately what we need to see for a functioning, sustainable domestic recycling market.
So that approach really should be anywhere in the world. Are we seeing enough collaboration between, say, brands in the FMCG sector, recycling, waste? Do you think everyone talks enough together? Are we joined enough? Like, sometimes I feel we have lots of industry groups, and sometimes they're all aligned, but there are times where they're not aligned. Yeah. Like, how do you see that, Matt?
That is such a good question, and I think traditionally the answer would be no. We actually haven't seen that degree of interconnectivity as much as we would like to, and that's always a challenge for a country like Australia, where we do import so much of our goods and products. But I think the packaging targets have absolutely reset that conversation. So traditionally, my engagement with the industry has largely been recyclers. In the last sort of 12 to 18 months, that engagement has really amped up from a brand owner point of view. And I always look at the UK. If you look at how the UK market, and you know it probably better than I do, but if you look at how the UK market evolved, it was actually when the brand owners came in, particularly the supermarket chains, and said, you know what, we can't outsource this to a recycling company. It's our role, our responsibility to make sure that we're playing that sort of socially responsible role as part of the supply chain. And when Tesco's and Sainsbury's and Waitrose started throwing their weight around, it completely recalibrated the industry. I think, we've seen companies like Coca-Cola Amatil publicly talk about their JV with Veolia and what the opportunity there is for domestic recycling of PET. That is only a positive, and if we get more of those large brand owners taking responsibility for the role they play in the supply chain and their packaging chain, that can only benefit the recycling sector, because some of the failings we've seen in the past have been opportunistic people in the recycling sector seeing the opportunity to make a buck from taking something, but not necessarily having an outlet for it to go. These guys think about it the other way. They want the product to service their packaging supply chain, which means they've got a vested interest in the upstream recycling process, and that's great. And we've seen sort of the role of container deposit schemes in other states and territories really foster that investment. And very keen to see similar investment in Victoria.
Yeah, I mean, just for the wider audience, I mean, not every country has a container deposit scheme, and one of the things I'm proud about in Australia is that we do have them, and everyone's got their view on them. But like, to me, clearly what happens is it does get people involved in the conversation. It does bring communities together. You know, it does make people aware of what recycling is and how single source recycling collected at source is the way to do it. And so obviously we're not far away maybe from that announcement here in Victoria to bring Victoria in line with the other states, which is a massive tick, I think. In relation to that, Matt, I mean, where do you see education fits in all this? Everyone always says to us, hey guys, we need more education, and there's loads of people doing it. Is there a bigger gap on education as people think?
There is, and it's something that we're really cognizant of, and have been fortunate enough to get some funding to do a little bit more education under the Recycling Industry Strategic Plan, and it's certainly something that will be a key focus of the Victoria's new waste policy when it's released over the coming weeks and months. You're absolutely right. I mean, essentially this idea that the recycling industry, that we set up a recycling industry that revolves around a mixed yellow lid bin that's kind of a choose your own adventure, that's set up separately across 79 different councils with different things they accept and different lids. The idea that that's not going to confuse the community and cause it angst and ultimately lead to this sort of mixed stream of products that a MRF somehow needs to magically disaggregate. It's not the ideal way to develop a recycling sector, and I think if we had our time again, we'd probably think twice about going so far down the commingled recycling route. So I think all of those things you've been talking about in terms of container deposit schemes and the role they play in getting better separated commodities, and equally the role of engaging with our households on a deep, regular and simple way, so that if you are a householder in Nillumbik or a householder in Yarra Ranges or a householder in Port Phillip or wherever you are, you're really clear on what the expectation is of you, what goes in what bin, how that needs to be presented at the curbside, and that ultimately will lead to MRFs that are more able to cope with those streams and higher commodity prices and higher opportunity for that at the end of the line. So we completely believe that behaviour change and education is one of the key pillars of making a strong, sustainable recycling sector in Victoria. Yeah.
And just one final one, Matt, and just digging back to your journey on this. When everything has seemed so urgent, and there's been, like, everything's been high urgency, and I know what it's like in my life when everything's high importance, everything's urgent. Have you guys gone about, you know, working out what is urgent, and then what projects should we fund first? Like, how do you prioritise that when everything seems high urgency? Yeah,
look, it's a really good question. I think in government that is one of the key things. Urgency in a business is obviously really driven by what your customers need and where profit's going or where profit's not going. We've kind of got this mixed urgency that comes from not only what the sector is telling us, but the pressure that our politicians are getting. And as soon as the Premier or somebody else starts getting pressure, that pressure gets pushed into the public service pretty quickly. I cannot underestimate the value of good market intelligence, and it is something that SV is got a very good reputation for, both in Victoria and across Australia. We publish every month a Recovered Resources Market Bulletin, I think it's called, which is really about getting good aggregated information about the shape and structure and condition of recycling markets. What are the commodities that are functioning well? What are the commodities that aren't functioning well? Why is that happening? So for me, in terms of prioritisation, it's got to come down to good market intelligence. We get that both from a formal data provision point of view and also just good engagement with the industry, going out there, meeting people, talking to people, hearing what's happening on the ground, and then feeding that intel back into government. So that helps us prioritise, and equally, and perhaps more importantly, it helps us give government, senior level government bureaucrats and politicians the information they need to help them prioritise. And I think if there's one message to anybody out there, either in Victoria or Australia or internationally, when government comes to you and it needs information, do your best to provide it. And I know that can be challenging sometimes because it's commercially sensitive and it's important for you guys in running your businesses. But it's very difficult for industry to turn around and say, government, you guys stuffed this up. You didn't make the right investment, and we're sitting around going, well, we made the investments based, or the decisions based on the information that we could get from the market. So it's kind of the same way you say, crap in and crap out from a recycling point of view. It's the same for that market intelligence. Give government good information, give government good data, tell us what's going on, and hopefully that'll help decision makers to target the right interventions.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to finish on today. I know we can go on for hours. So guys, really, we've all got the ability to make a change, and we've all got the ability to participate. And it's important that we all do participate across every level of this, whether it's private industry, the government. We've all got knowledge we need to share, and it's something that we've been really big on, is trying to share as much knowledge as we can to supercharge these conversations along. So Matt, really appreciate you coming on, mate, and sharing your industry expertise, your personal expertise, and what Sustainability Victoria is doing here in Australia. And for anyone internationally, if you're in the UK, Europe, America, wherever you are, go and check out their website. And I really mean this, go and have a look at what they're doing. They cover so many different areas, whether it's resource recovery, which is Matt's area, whether it's targeting energy consumption, whether it's food waste hate, I think it is, yeah?
Yep, love food hate waste,
love
that's
food
right.
Waste,
Hate waste.
Hate waste. So guys, go and check it out. But thanks again for tuning in to this episode of Think Beginning Not End. Please remember to subscribe and turn notifications on, and we'll see you next time.
Good, thanks,
Thank
mate.
you very
That
much.
went really well.
Was it all right?
Yeah, that was
Very
loads
well.
of good stuff.
Oh, good.